Hello, friends. Welcome to Banking Frontiers. My name is Manoj Agrawal. I'm the group editor. And today I'm in a conversation with Shubhangi Vashisth. She's an analyst at Gartner. And the topic of our conversation is artificial intelligence. Shubhangi, welcome to Banking Frontiers interview. How are you doing?
Thank you, Manoj. I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me here.
Would you like to briefly introduce yourself, your background, the kind of work you do?
I'm an analyst at Gartner and I focus on AI and machine learning as the core areas that fall under my research coverage. It is more a horizontal coverage that I have. I cover AI as an industry agnostic and domain agnostic, more from a technology perspective. And we tend to look at all aspects related with the tools, the technologies, but also extend to the organizational aspects associated with adopting AI, how to get started with AI, and so on.
So that's great, Shubhangi. We are going to focus more on the financial sector. And my first question is generic in a sense, given the pandemic situation and the lockdown. Is there any example of AI that has come out with flying colors in today's scenario to deal with the pandemic and the lockdown?
Yes, in fact, we saw AI being applied in a lot of situations during the pandemic. So, consider, for example, early detection of the epidemic, any kind of epidemic analysis. Governments were using AI to forecast what would be the requirements in terms of the medicine, how to optimize their resources, where to focus, like even at a state level, at a city level, at various smaller county levels, how to focus more on specific areas, geographies, sectors to fight epidemic in a better way. So a huge role that AI had to play in all of these areas. Plus, even if you look at the containment operations, a lot of computer vision was being used to detect wherever there are crowds gathering or if there is any kind of violation of the norms like social distancing or wearing masks and so on. So again, from a containment perspective, from a triage and diagnosis perspective, AI played a very important role in all of these aspects. And then if you only look at the all the R&D, the research and development that the pharma companies undertook, basically to come up with a vaccine for COVID and any further research that goes in that sector, it leverages AI to a great deal because you're not only dealing with structured data, but a lot of information is also coming from semi-structured, unstructured sources. Like news feeds, like research articles published in any kind of language across the world, which might be relevant. So AI has played a significant role in helping the organizations, helping the governments, the individuals to deal with pandemic in a better way, in a faster way.
Very interesting. Right. Uh, let's go on a little bit into the financial sector now. Please share a couple of examples of out of box thinking use of AI in the financial sector that you've come across.
So some of the trends that we see really gain a lot of traction within financial sector per se is one would be the increased use of intelligent applications. So even at Gartner, we have seen a lot of end users ask us, how can they do, and this is not just plain automation, not robotic automation that I'm referring to, but actually having intelligence or AI embedded within their applications. One example would be document processing. Think of a tool or an application that could ingest documents in any format, be it a PDF or a Word file, and then process it, do some kind of a validation or a quality check, process it, and then you could also extend it to other content types. So think if on the similar lines you want to analyze speech or audio files, also image or video files. So increasingly, how can the sector utilize all those different content types to gain better understanding? So all of these areas are where we saw banking, financial services really leveraging AI. And then there are more standard services where you could have models that help you predict customer churn or help you in doing any kind of scoring for loans or any other applications, helping with processes like claims settlement and so on. So all these areas, in fact, have been very popular for banking services. Chatbots and intelligent applications were two areas where we saw a lot of interest from these organizations and also adoption to make their current processes smoother, to help them work with even, let's say, reduced staff or challenges with people availability or not.
How can an organization kind of have some kind of mechanism to analyze the output of AI and be have some level of confidence that the AI output is accurate, it's not biased, it's not faulty? Are there mechanisms like that?
Yes, there are, Manoj. In fact, you touched a very interesting topic. We see responsible AI as a topic, as a theme in itself, gaining a lot of popularity. The reason being, firstly, when it comes to AI, and before even looking at the technology, the reason, one primary reason is as AI augments, or in a lot of cases even replaces human decision making at scale, you need to ensure that you get it right, because whatever the positive or negative impacts of using AI are in the first place, they would only be amplified when you apply the technology at scale. That is one of the reasons, not just the regulated industries, so of course banking, healthcare, insurance, not just these industries, but we see an increased focus on making your AI more trustworthy, more explainable, more bias detection, controls in place, a fairness algorithm in place, or things like complete transparency into the process. So if an AI model was used, how did it arrive at a particular conclusion or a particular outcome? Can you do that? Can you trace it to right to the level of what data was used to train it in the first place so that it gave us a specific outcome? Those are the kind of discussions a lot of organizations are having. And the aspect to look or consider here is also that very often there is a trade off between accuracy and explainability. If you go for very accurate models, which might be utilizing deep neural networks and multiple layers of deep neural networks, in those cases, the explainability of the model reduces by default. When we talk of responsible AI, it is an umbrella term. It covers all the aspects that I mentioned, including explainability of models, transparency, risk control, any issues related with security of the entire AI pipeline, and then aspects also related to fairness, bias mitigation, transparency in general. It also includes elements of ethics and societal value. Some of these elements are right now, you cannot possibly translate it directly into something tangible, like, into a product that tells you what is ethical or not. It is more a human dimension still, right? We have to, as a society, as an organization, this is the responsibility of organizations, how to deal whenever they are developing a new AI model or application or a project. How should they think along those principles? That is where responsible AI would give you a set of guidelines to think through the process to come up with a better product.
That's interesting. Let's go on then. Any fundamental major improvements in AI techniques or technologies or algorithms at a fundamental level? Or are we doing mostly incremental progress?
That is interesting. So, what we see is that a lot of AI techniques or machine learning, when it comes to applying the basic principles of statistics, right, those remain the same. However, where we see innovations happening, one is hardware, of course. So, across all the decades that we have seen AI develop, the actual scale was achieved when we could do a lot of innovation with hardware. Storing all of that data, how do you process it at sub-second or millisecond time levels, real-time processing. All of that has led to a lot of movement and progress in AI. However, that said, it's a rapidly evolving field. We also saw, for instance, approaches like transformers, which could help do a lot of new types of AI which weren't existing before. So, for instance, you could leverage tools to generate data synthetically, which is very interesting. If you do not have a lot of data, there are approaches which use GANs, generative adversarial networks, and it helps you to generate synthetic data.
Very interesting. Interesting to note these fundamental innovations. Great. Within the financial sector, do you see AI being used selectively for specific projects? Or do you see organizations now having the trust and maybe the desire to use AI as a strategy and create an organizational approach to AI as opposed to an application-wise approach? What do you see as more common, and what do you see as which approach is more successful?
What I see, and this would be true for banking, financial services, insurance, these sectors, is the fact that more and more organizations realize the benefits of using AI. In a lot of cases, it's a necessity for them. So a lot of organizations think of use cases like dealing with fraud. If you do not have good fraud detection models in place, or do not have enough steps to mitigate preemptively any fraudulent activities, it will incur a cost to the business, right? When it comes to even things like intelligent applications, if you can really create processes which utilize these applications and help reduce considerable amount of man hours, you save time there and use your resources in other activities. All of those are gains for the organizations. So on a spectrum of starting from, let's say, intelligent applications, moving towards more complex models, using different kinds of natural language techniques, computer vision techniques, what could differ between organizations is how they tackle the entire plethora of techniques available to them.
Okay.
Some are leading the space with a lot of AI already, since it's a part of their overall AI strategy for most of these organizations. And what they try to do is use AI as a competitive differentiator. So you think of innovative products or services that you could offer to your customers in turn using AI, so that it becomes a competitive differentiator for your organization. Else, in your tactical operations, a lot of organizations are anyway leveraging AI today in different forms.
Now, let me come to my final question. And, AI is one technology that is blurring the boundaries between human intelligence and machine intelligence. So, do you see AI making or driving some kind of cultural changes as organizations adapt to a combination of two kinds of intelligence as opposed to one kind of intelligence earlier?
Absolutely. That is one of the, in fact, I would say major shifts happening, because as soon as you move to a model, and depending on what the culture was within the organization, some organizations are more reliant on human decision making. So for them, even before AI, when you shift to using analytics, even traditional analytics techniques, that could be a shift or a cultural change for them. For others, they might be comfortable with that kind of analytics, but when it comes to using models and relying on those outcomes to make your decision, again, where, when I talked about responsible AI, I said making it more trustworthy for stakeholders is important, because ultimately they are the ones who will use, or if they do not want to rely on, then possibly not use the outcomes. How do you ensure that that bridge is established where the stakeholders not just realize the value, but they also place their trust on those AI models that are existing in the organization? And that is where the overall, when we talk of change management, it often begins with the discussion on data literacy. How literate are people in terms of leveraging data in the first place, rather than only going by your gut feel, or some other way of decision making that you had been relying or doing in the past.
So, Shubhangi, thank you very much.